The night was tearing apart with the sound of howling wolves, and one young girl's desperate race through the forest was about to end in blood, until a mysterious forest ranger stepped out of the shadows. Don't scroll, stay with me. This story will chill you to the bone and warm your heart at the same time. Her name was Emily, a 19-year-old girl with fiery hair and a stubborn spirit. She had wandered too far from the village, thinking she could handle the woods alone, but when the first growl rose behind her, she realized how deadly wrong she was. Emily's boots slipped on the frozen ground as she darted between the trees, her chest burning with every gasp of icy air. The wolves were closer now, their glowing eyes darting between the trunks like fragments of living fire. Fear clawed at her throat, but her will to survive pushed her legs forward. Branches whipped her face, leaving thin red scratches. Her heart screamed louder than the howls around her. She had no weapon, no way out. The forest seemed endless and cruel. Then suddenly she stumbled into a small clearing where the moonlight painted the snow silver. She froze, her breath shaking, and for a moment the silence was unbearable, until the growls rose again, circling, hungry. The pack emerged from the darkness, fangs bared, eyes locked on her. Emily's knees weakened, her mind whispered that this was her final night. But just as the first wolf lunged forward, a thunderous gunshot split the silence. The beast tumbled into the snow with a yelp. The rest stopped, growling deeper, and from the edge of the clearing a tall figure stepped out, a man in a heavy coat with a rifle steady in his hands, his voice low but commanding as he said, "Get behind me if you want to live." Emily stumbled back, her boots sinking into the snow, and without thinking she obeyed, pressing herself behind the stranger's broad frame. The wolves snarled, their teeth glinting in the moonlight, circling tighter. The man's shoulders never moved. His presence felt like a wall of iron. He fired again, the blast echoing like thunder, and another wolf collapsed into the whiteness. The pack wavered now, torn between hunger and fear. His calm voice carried through the night, "Go on, try your luck." He muttered coldly, cocking the rifle once more. Emily clutched the back of his coat, trembling, and for the first time since she entered the woods she felt a sliver of safety. The alpha wolf lowered its head, growled long and deep, then with a sharp bark it turned. The pack melted into the black forest shadows. The silence after was so heavy it felt unreal. Emily's legs gave out. She sank to the snow, but strong hands caught her before she hit the ground. "Easy now," the man said, lowering the gun and kneeling beside her. His eyes, pale as steel, finally met hers. "You're safe. I'm the forest ranger here. Name's Daniel. You had no business running through these woods at night." Emily tried to answer, but her lips trembled too hard to form words. Her breath came out in sharp clouds as she looked at him. The moonlight revealed a face rugged from years in the wild, with a scar running across his jaw that only made him look stronger. Daniel draped his thick coat over her shoulders, the warmth swallowing her instantly. She clutched it tight, her eyes wide with both fear and gratitude. I thought they would tear me apart," she whispered finally, her voice barely audible. Daniel's expression softened for the first time. "They would have, if I hadn't heard you scream," he said firmly, then rose to his feet and offered his hand. Emily hesitated but placed her small frozen fingers into his calloused palm. He pulled her up as if she weighed nothing. "Come on, my cabin's close by. You won't last long out here in this cold," he added, his tone leaving no room for argument. Emily nodded silently, still shaken, and followed him into the dense forest, each step away from the clearing feeling like she was being led out of a nightmare into something unknown. The snow crunched under their boots as Daniel guided her along a narrow path hidden between tall pines. The forest seemed less threatening now, though every distant crack of a branch made Emily flinch. Daniel walked ahead with steady confidence, his rifle slung across his back, glancing over his shoulder from time to time to be sure she kept up. The coat around her shoulders smelled faintly of smoke and pine, and with every step she felt the terror fading, replaced by a strange calm. After what felt like an eternity, a small cabin appeared between the trees, its chimney sending a thin line of smoke into the night sky. Warm golden light flickered through the wooden shutters. Daniel pushed the door open and motioned for her to step inside. The air inside was thick with the scent of burning wood, the crackle of the fire welcoming her like an embrace. Emily's eyes roamed over the simple but sturdy interior, shelves lined with tools, a wooden table, a pair of chairs, and pelts hanging by the walls. Daniel closed the door behind them, shutting out the cold and the darkness, then turned to her, his gaze steady. "You'll stay here until morning," he said, his voice carrying a finality that both comforted and unsettled her. Emily sat by the fire, her hands stretched toward the flames, warmth seeping back into her body, and for the first time that night she allowed herself to believe she might actually survive. Daniel moved quietly around the cabin, hanging his rifle on the wall and stoking the fire until the flames danced brighter. Emily watched him, still hugging his coat around her shoulders. The shadows painted across his face made him look both fierce and protective. He set a kettle on the iron stove, the hiss of water filling the silence. "You were lucky tonight," he said without looking at her, his deep voice rumbling low. "Wolves don't usually let anyone walk away." Emily lowered her gaze to her trembling hands, her voice breaking. "I never should have gone out alone. I thought I knew these woods, but I didn't." Daniel finally turned, his eyes sharp but not unkind. "The forest doesn't forgive mistakes," he said simply, then placed a steaming cup in front of her. "Drink, it'll warm you." She wrapped her fingers around the mug, the heat almost burning but soothing at the same time. As she took a small sip, she felt strength return little by little. Daniel sat across from her, leaning back in his chair, arms crossed, studying her in silence, the crackle of the fire filling the space between them. "So," he said after a moment, "what's a girl like you doing in the heart of the forest at night?" Emily hesitated, her eyes fixed on the flames as if searching for courage within them. "I live in the village by the river," she murmured, her voice still shaky. "My grandmother is sick. I was on my way to fetch herbs that grow only at night. The healer said they might help. I thought I could be quick, but I lost the path." Her words trembled as much as her hands. Daniel's brow furrowed, the hardness in his eyes easing into something closer to concern. "Brave," he said finally, his tone low and thoughtful, but reckless. "Those woods past the river aren't meant for anyone to wander, especially not alone." Emily clutched the cup tighter, ashamed. "I only wanted to help her," she whispered. Daniel leaned forward, the firelight glinting off the scar on his jaw. "And you nearly gave your life for it," he replied, not unkindly but with a weight that made her chest ache. Silence hung heavy for a moment, broken only by the crack of burning logs, then softer, almost to himself, Daniel added, "Still, it takes a rare kind of heart to risk so much for someone else." Emily glanced up at him, and for the first time since the night began she saw not just a savior, but a man who understood the cost of survival. Daniel stood and moved to the window, peering out into the endless black of the forest, his silhouette framed by the glow of the fire. "The wolves won't return tonight," he said quietly, almost as if reassuring himself as much as her. "But danger in these woods never truly sleeps." Emily followed his gaze, shivering at the thought of those yellow eyes waiting just beyond the tree line. Yet here, inside these wooden walls, she felt an invisible shield around her. He turned back, his presence filling the small cabin, and pulled a blanket from a chest, placing it gently over her shoulders. "Rest," he said firmly. "Your body's been through enough. Tomorrow I'll take you back to your village." Emily's lips parted. She wanted to thank him but words faltered. Instead she only whispered, "Why did you help me?" Daniel paused for a long moment, his eyes unreadable, then finally spoke, "Because no one deserves to be left to the wolves." His voice carried a quiet gravity that lingered in the air. Emily lay down on the simple wooden bed he pointed to, the blanket cocooning her in warmth, and as her heavy eyelids closed she felt the fire crackle, the storm of fear slowly fading. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was the image of Daniel standing guard by the window, silent and unmovable, like the forest itself had given her a protector. Emily drifted into a deep, uneasy sleep, her dreams tangled with flickers of glowing eyes and snapping jaws. But each time the wolves lunged closer, the shadow of Daniel appeared, rifle in hand, driving them away. When dawn finally crept through the cracks of the shutters, painting the cabin in pale gold, she stirred awake to the scent of wood smoke and the low sound of movement. Daniel was already up, sharpening a hunting knife with calm precision, his coat thrown over a chair, the scar across his jaw catching the morning light. "You're awake," he said without turning, his voice steady as always. "There's food on the table, you'll need it for the walk back." Emily sat up slowly, the blanket slipping from her shoulders. She saw a plate of bread and dried meat waiting for her, simple but welcome. She picked it up with trembling fingers. "You kept watch all night?" she asked softly. Daniel finally looked at her, his eyes carrying that same unshakable calm. "The forest never sleeps," he replied, sliding the knife back into its sheath. "And I don't take chances with wolves so close." Emily's chest warmed with something more than gratitude. She took a bite, her hunger outweighing her lingering fear, and for a fleeting moment she felt safe, as though the cabin and the man who guarded it were the only steady ground in a world of shadows and teeth. When she finished eating, Daniel pulled on his coat and lifted the rifle from its place on the wall, his movements steady and practiced. "We leave now. The sooner we get you back to the village, the better," he said, his tone leaving no room for doubt. Emily rose, wrapping the blanket tighter around herself before draping his coat back over her shoulders. It was far too big for her, but it carried warmth and the scent of pine that gave her courage. Outside, the forest was still and pale under the weak morning sun. Frost glittered on every branch, and the silence was so deep it pressed against her ears. Daniel walked ahead, his boots cutting a path through the snow. Every so often his eyes swept the treeline, sharp and alert. Emily followed closely, glancing nervously at the shadows between the pines. "Do you live out here all alone?" she asked quietly, her voice carrying in the frozen air. Daniel nodded once, not slowing his pace. "The forest is my duty. It's safer for others if I keep watch from inside it." She studied his back, broad and unyielding, and felt a strange pull in her chest, a mixture of fear, awe, and trust. Step by step, with him leading the way, the forest no longer seemed like an endless trap, but a place that could be crossed, survived, perhaps even understood. They moved deeper along the snowy trail, the crunch of their boots the only sound in the morning stillness. Emily hugged his coat tighter, each breath rising in little white clouds. Daniel paused often, scanning the trees with a hunter's instinct, and every time he did she felt a jolt of safety, knowing nothing would escape his eyes. After a long stretch of silence she finally whispered, "Were you always a ranger?" He glanced back, his expression unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. "No," he said simply, "I was a soldier once, too many years ago. The forest offered me peace when people couldn't." Emily lowered her gaze, sensing a heaviness behind those words, one she dared not disturb. They walked on until the faint sound of running water reached them. Daniel raised his hand for her to stop. Crouching low, Emily froze, her heart pounding as she watched him study the snow, his gloved fingers brushing over fresh tracks. "Dear," he muttered, relaxing slightly. "Not wolves. We're fine," she exhaled, realizing she'd been holding her breath. As they continued, the trees began to thin and in the distance Emily saw smoke curling into the sky. The village, home, safety, yet a strange pang ran through her chest, for with every step closer to it she felt the presence of the man ahead of her. The one who had saved her life, growing heavier, more important, as if part of her already feared leaving it behind. The village rooftops finally came into view, their chimneys sending up lazy streams of smoke, and Emily's heart leapt with relief, yet at the same time a tightness pulled at her chest. Daniel slowed his pace as the path widened, the noise of distant voices and the barking of dogs reaching their ears. "You'll be safe now," he said firmly, though his tone carried something quieter, almost reluctant. Emily looked at him, the towering figure with the scarred jaw and steady eyes, and realized how much of her strength in the last hours had come only because he was near. "Will I see you again?" she asked softly, afraid of her own question. Daniel paused, adjusting the rifle on his shoulder, his gaze sweeping the village below. "The forest is never far," he replied, his voice calm but layered with meaning. Then he stepped aside, motioning for her to go ahead. The villagers, spotting her red hair from afar, began calling her name, rushing up the path with relief in their cries. Emily walked forward, but her eyes kept flicking back, watching Daniel as he stood at the edge of the trees, silent and unmoving, like a guardian carved from the wilderness itself. And though her feet carried her back to her people, part of her heart stayed with the man who had led her out of the darkness. The villagers surrounded Emily, wrapping her in blankets and asking a flurry of questions, but their voices felt distant, muffled, as if she were listening through water. Her eyes never left the treeline where Daniel still stood, tall and solitary, the snow swirling faintly around him. Her grandmother, frail and pale, was carried out to greet her, tears streaming down the old woman's face as she touched Emily's cheeks, whispering blessings of gratitude. Yet even in that moment of reunion, Emily's gaze searched for Daniel, but when she looked again, the edge of the forest was empty. He had vanished into the pines without a sound, leaving behind nothing but tracks in the snow. She pressed her hand to her chest, a strange ache growing there. The memory of his coat's warmth, his steady voice, his unshakable presence. That night as she lay in her bed, safe among her family, she closed her eyes and could still see him by the firelight, the scar on his jaw catching the glow, his eyes steady as steel. And she knew the forest had not only given her back her life, it had left her with a guardian whose shadow would follow her dreams forever. Days passed, and though Emily tried to settle back into the rhythm of village life, the memory of that night refused to fade. Each morning when she woke to the sound of roosters, she half expected to hear the echo of wolves or the steady crack of Daniel's rifle. She helped her grandmother with chores, gathered water from the river, and walked through the market square where neighbors smiled and asked if she was well. She nodded politely, but her thoughts were elsewhere. Often her eyes drifted toward the dark line of the forest beyond the fields, searching for a glimpse of movement, a tall figure among the trees. Sometimes at dusk she thought she saw a shadow lingering there, watching, and her heart would leap before doubt washed over her. One evening as the sky turned crimson and the first stars began to pierce the horizon, Emily carried firewood to her home. Pausing once more to stare at the forest, the wind whistled through the pines, and for a fleeting moment she swore she heard his voice, calm and steady, whispering in memory, "The forest is never far." She clutched the wood to her chest, a shiver racing down her spine, not of fear but of longing, knowing deep inside that her story with Daniel had not ended in that snowy clearing. It had only begun. Winter tightened its grip on the land, the river froze thick, and nights grew longer. Yet Emily's thoughts wandered more often into the forest than into the village streets. One evening her grandmother asked softly, "Child, why do your eyes always search the trees?" Emily flushed and lowered her gaze, murmuring something about gathering herbs again, but her heart throbbed with the truth she couldn't speak. She was waiting for the man who had vanished like a shadow. Weeks later, after a heavy snowfall, she ventured beyond the fields with a basket, telling herself she needed berries. Though none would be found this season, the forest loomed ahead, silent and endless, and as she stepped beneath its branches, her breath quickened with both fear and hope. She followed a trail half buried in snow until the sound of snapping twigs froze her in place. Her pulse raced, her mind flashed back to glowing eyes in the dark, but instead of wolves a figure emerged from the pines, tall and familiar, his coat dusted with frost, his rifle slung across his back. Daniel. He stopped a few steps away, studying her with those steady steel eyes. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly, though his voice carried no anger, only that calm weight she remembered. Emily's lips parted but no words came. Her chest burned with 1,000 things unsaid, and for the first time since that night, she felt the world around her disappear until there was only him, the forest, and the unspoken pull between them. Emily's breath caught in her throat. the snowflakes clinging to her hair as if the forest itself wanted to hold her still. Daniel's gaze lingered on her a moment longer before he stepped closer, his boots sinking deep into the white silence. "The woods don't forgive carelessness," he murmured, his tone low but steady. "You've already tempted fate once." She gripped the basket in her hands, her knuckles white against the wicker. I couldn't stay away," she whispered, surprising herself with the honesty of her words. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger but as if weighing her confession against the shadows of the trees around them. "You're braver than you should be," he said at last, his voice softer now, "and that can be dangerous." Emily swallowed hard, her heart pounding as she took a tentative step toward him. The distance between them closing like the forest itself was pushing them together. "Maybe," she said, her voice trembling but firm, "but I feel safer here with you than anywhere else." Daniel's jaw tightened, the scar along it catching the faint light. For a long moment he said nothing, only studied her with those eyes that seemed carved from the wilderness itself. Then slowly, almost reluctantly, he lifted his gloved hand and brushed a strand of hair from her face, the touch brief, fleeting, yet enough to send a warmth through her chest that no fire could match. The forest held its breath around them, every branch heavy with snow, every sound swallowed by the silence. Emily's heart raced so loudly she feared he could hear it. Daniel's hand lingered a fraction too long before he pulled it back, his expression unreadable. "You don't understand what it means to walk these woods with me," he said quietly, his voice carrying something darker, heavier. "Danger follows me, not just wolves, not just storms." Emily shook her head, her eyes locked on his. "Then let it follow. I'm not afraid anymore, not when you're near." The faintest flicker crossed his face, a shadow of something he fought to hide, perhaps sorrow, perhaps longing. He turned slightly, as though preparing to disappear into the trees again, but her hand shot out, grasping his sleeve, small and desperate. "Don't go," she whispered, the plea raw. Daniel froze, the muscles in his arm tense beneath her touch. The silence stretched like a bowstring. Then finally, with a slow breath, he turned back to her, his steel-gray eyes softer than she had ever seen. "You don't know what you're asking," he said, though the strength had thinned from his words. And in that fragile moment, as the snow drifted gently between them, Emily realized the forest had given her not just a savior, but a secret she was now unwilling to let go. Daniel stood motionless, the silence of the forest pressing around them, his breath misting in the cold. Emily's fingers still clung to his sleeve as if letting go would send him vanishing back into the shadows. For a long moment he simply looked at her, his eyes carrying all the weight of battles fought in silence. Then he exhaled slowly and placed his hand over hers, firm and steady. "Very well," he murmured, his voice deep, almost a vow. "But understand this, once you walk with me, the forest will never let you go." Emily's heart surged with a strange, fierce certainty. "Then let it keep me," she whispered, her voice stronger than she felt. The tension between them broke like ice under the sun. Daniel's lips curved into the faintest trace of a smile, a rare glimpse of warmth breaking through the steel. He released her sleeve only to take her hand fully, his grip strong, protective, and unyielding. The snow fell thicker now, wrapping the world in white silence, as he guided her deeper into the woods, not as a lost girl and her savior, but as two souls bound by a night of wolves and fire. The village lights fading behind, the forest swallowing them whole. Yet for the first time Emily felt no fear, only the certainty that her place was here, at his side, wherever the wild might lead.